Welcome to this evening's webinar, Living Wisely, Living Well. I'd like to begin. By the way, my name is Nayaswami Jaya, and I'd like to begin with this reading today. Reading for today from this book, Living Wisely, Living Well, by Swami Yogananda. Swamiji writes, "Never reduce people mentally to stereotypes. Everyone is, in his own way, unique. To typecast a person is to impose limitations on him that may paralyze his progress." When Paramahansa Yogananda left India in 1920 to travel around the world, the other side of the world to America, his guru, Swami Stereotyping, told him before he left India, he said, when you go to America, when in America, forget that you're an Indian, but don't become an American either. In other words, become a citizen of the world. And this is what Paramahansa Yogananda was. He was not identified with any one country, he was identified with the universe. He was identified with everybody. And I noticed this same quality also in Swami Yogananda. Swamiji, as some of you know, if you've read his life story, was an American his parents were in Romania at the time of his birth. His father was an oil geologist, and he was born there in Romania and lived there for many years, going to school, primary school there, and a little bit up into secondary school as well, but traveling from time to time to America on holiday. Finally, before he graduated from high school, his family moved. War was coming, Second World War, and his family moved to America, and he continued his schooling in America. So he was in America and spent his college years there, and he met Paramahansa Yogananda there in Los Angeles. So in some ways he was an American, but he was also very much a European, and yet his religious inclinations, his philosophical inclinations, were associated with the East, with India. And during his lifetime he traveled extensively, every continent probably, maybe except for Antarctica. He visited all of them, and wherever he went, he was able to attune himself to the people of that country and was able to relate to the people of that country, and most felt that he was one of them. He spoke 7 languages or so and could easily blend in and attune himself to people wherever he went. And this is the quality I think that all of us want to have, is we don't want to be necessarily identified, personally identified with any place, because we're citizens of the world. We're free souls. I've noticed in my lifetime, many people, they perhaps are born and raised and they live at a certain place all their lives, and anybody who comes from the neighboring town is a foreigner. They're seen as a foreigner, they're seen as an outsider. And consequently, it seems to be a natural tendency of the mind to stereotype other people. Oh, he's from somewhere else. He speaks a different language. He's from elsewhere. He's somehow different than me. And we tend to put people, other people, very obviously in terms of foreigners, into boxes and typecast them, stereotype them. Well, not only do we do this, of course, for people from other countries, but we do it with people who differ in some fashion for ourselves. We stereotype people, and this, of course, is not helpful. It begins to emphasize the differences that we have with other people, when the goal of yoga and the spiritual teachings are meant to help us to bridge those differences, to see, in essence, as souls, we're all one. And these things are merely superficial outside appearances. But nevertheless, there are differences, and you find people, they come from different parts of the world, there are differences, and Yogananda would delight sometimes in noticing these differences, and because Swamiji had been such a world traveler and speaking so many languages and visiting so many countries, that he had a great delight too in the variety of people that you meet in this life of all sorts and all sorts of from different countries. And he had a very acute ability to be able to speak in certain accents and mannerisms from wherever he went. And he delighted in it and had fun with it. But it was always done in a very, very kindly way. And this is how Yogananda was as well. He was always very kindly, and he would sometimes tell jokes. And I'd like to share a couple of jokes with you, just very simple jokes of not so much this point of seeing differences, but of the sweetness or the humor that Master sometimes enjoyed. It seems that he had visited England and Scotland and these countries on his way to and from India when he went there in the 1930s from America. And he mentioned about how the different characteristics of the people in those countries are. And as some of you know, the Scotsmen are noted for being very frugal, that they're very tight with their finances. And so he would tell the story of how there were three Scotsmen at a Sunday satsang, or Sunday church service, and at the conclusion of the church services, the collection plate was passed. Well, as soon as the collection plate came to the three Scotsmen, the first one fainted. And his two friends, the other two, picked him up and carried him out before they had the chance to avoid putting money into the plate. And Master would tell this very simple story, and he would laugh and laugh at that and have such a great time, and people would join him in that laughter. And he would tell another one about his time. I think he had learned it in Scotland when he was there. He would tell about how into a tavern, three men went into a tavern. A Scotsman, an Irishman, and an Englishman. And as they went into the tavern, the bartender served them each a glass of whiskey. And but at the very same time, while the three were sitting at the bar and the tavern, three flies flew in and landed in the whiskey glasses. Well, the Irishman, looking at his glass of whiskey with the fly in there, kind of swirled it and threw the fly out. But in the process of doing that, of course, some of the drink went out with it. Well, the Englishman, what he did, he looked at the fly and there very carefully flicked the fly out of his glass. And the Scotsman, the third, saw the fly in there, and very delicately grabbed the fly and squeezed it to get the maximum effect. And when Master would say this joke, he would say, "Squeeze the fly," and would just uproariously start laughing at this, and everybody would laugh. But he meant it in a kindly way. He would never tell jokes that were hurtful or anything like that. And of course, as a master, he didn't have a sense of separation. To him, all were his brothers and sisters, and he felt a sympathy, but he loved to find that sympathy and commonality with a good, hearty laugh. Now, seeing differences in stereotyping and pigeonholing people, because of perhaps their background, their ethnicity, their race, where they come from, their education, isn't it? So you can pick many different, whatever category. People like to separate and see how I am different from you. And this is basically a tendency of the ego principle at work within us, to be able to see those. As opposed to, as we progress and as we begin to see underneath the surface, we begin to see the unity of those things that bring us together. And seeing the differences, as the reading says today, when we emphasize differences, what we're doing is we're placing a limitation on another person. And actually, when we see somebody like that and we limit them, and oftentimes when we limit them, we're seeing them in a negative light. We're saying, oh, they're different than me. They're other. And perhaps there's a negative impression. When we do that, we're actually sending a negative thought to that person. We're isolating that person, and it's not good. You could say it's a little bit of a curse. We're sending a curse to another person, as opposed to when we embrace another person in our commonality, we're actually sending to that other person a blessing, and we're uplifting it, that other person. But more so than the effect of our attitudes and our thoughts toward other people, of what it does to them, it certainly may not actually help them, and it sometimes can be detrimental to them to be able to see those differences. The real damage is not done to them, it's done to ourselves. When we isolate ourselves from other people and see our sense of isolation, this ultimately is something that's going to be negative to us, and we are the ones who eventually are it's detracting from us. We're the losers in that. When we see people, when we stereotype people, when we place people in boxes, we're limiting them, and to an extent we're closing ourselves off from them, but we're also closing ourselves off from the world at large, and we're closing us off from the divine ability of the world and God to speak to us. Because how do we receive inspiration? How do we receive God's blessings? It comes to us through instruments. God works through this world in many, many different ways, speaking to us, who knows in what form. Just some incident in our life happens, and there's a message there for us. But if we shut that message out, how can we possibly receive that message, and how can we possibly receive the blessings that might be there? So we have to be open, and if we close ourselves off, we end up the loser in that. So seeing God in everything, realizing that all people are brothers and sisters, and being open to the inspiration that comes through any of them. I'd like to share another story just as an example of how Swami Kriyananda was, and an incident that happened in his life. He would meet all sorts of people would come to him, and some were very intelligent and refined, and others were a little bit, some people might say they didn't have much to share outwardly. It didn't seem that way. They weren't sophisticated in one way or another. But Swami was always respectful to everybody. Anybody who came, he saw them as a soul. They came to him for a purpose. And it's very similar to what Paramahansa Yogananda said. Who said, nobody crossed his path in his lifetime that it wasn't part of the divine plan for that to be. There was a meaning to it all. And so it is, I think, this probably is true for all of us in some way. So it was saying that in that same way it was with the Swami. Well, many years ago, and this is a story that was told to me by one of my sister Swamis, you might say, one of the lady Swamis who related this story to me, a good friend of mine from many years ago, probably 40 years ago. Swamiji was staying at our retreat property, which is a little bit remote outside of in the mountains of California. And at that time we still have that place, but it was a hermitage, and he had a home there, a small home, and he was staying there in seclusion. Well, as he was in seclusion, somebody would come to him every day and bring him his mail. Mail would come, the letters, and this was in the days before email and internet. People would write letters and so on, and they would bring it to him once a day. And at the same time, they would receive messages from him in case he was writing to somebody, sent outgoing mail. And from time to time, once every so many days, they would bring him some supplies if he needed them. But he would exchange messages at that time. And generally, Swamiji would stay in silence during that time. Well, this one friend of mine was assigned the task of bringing Swami his mail. So one day she was also there at our hermitage where guests would come, and she was in the office manning the reception desk at the office, and a lady came to the office and said, I would like to meet Swami Kriyananda and speak with him. And she said very politely to her, he says, well, I'm sorry, but Swami Kriyananda is in seclusion, and he's going to be in seclusion for another week or two. You're certainly welcome to stay at the retreat if you wish to stay that long, but unfortunately now it's just not possible to meet him. And she said, oh, I think he will want to meet me. I think he'll want to speak with me. And my friend said, well, I don't think so. I don't think so. You're welcome to send him a letter. You could write him a letter and I'll deliver that letter for you. And she said, no, I think he's going to want to speak with me. Please tell him. Well, that day, my friend went down and delivered the mail to Swamiji. Went down and gave the, oh, and by the way, before I go any further, in the process, my friend took down the registration information from this lady and said, oh, what in your name, please? And she gave her name. And he says, and where are you from? And she said, I'm from Venus. And so she wrote down Venus. Well, he says, oh, what state is that in? You know, there could be a city, a town named Venus. I mean, there are such things. What state might that be in? And she says, no, not state. I'm from Venus, the planet Venus. So my friend didn't say anything. She was being polite, but in her mind she was saying, oh boy, you know, we'd have another strange one. And from time to time we would get very strange people would come by. So, you know, and says, here we have another strange one here. And it says Venus. Okay. And then that day she went down to deliver Swami's mail. And Swamiji there was asked, he says, and the mail came, he says, and he spoke. And he said, oh, by the way, is there anything else? And my friend says, no, sir, that's all. And he says, are you sure there's nothing else? And my friend said, well, sir, because she didn't want to bother him, you see, with the lady from Venus. She says, there was one other strange thing. There's a lady here who wants to speak with you, and she said she's from Venus. And I told her it was not possible because you're in seclusion. And but she said you'd want to speak with her. And so Swami thought for a moment and said, please send her down. And so my friend went back, just shaking her head, and sent the lady from Venus down to meet Swamiji. Well, she was down there for maybe half hour or so, and she and Swamiji spoke, and then she came back up and she left. Now, my friend didn't know exactly what had happened, but some time later, a few weeks later, she and Swami Kriyananda were riding in the car, and she mentioned it to Swamiji. What about the lady from Venus? And Swamiji said, well, I don't think she was actually from the planet Venus, but she did have something to tell me. And my friend didn't feel confident enough to ask what it was. And all these years later, she's always wondered what it was that the lady from Venus, or purportedly, had actually said Swami. But the point of this story is that Swami was willing to listen. He was willing to listen because he had said, not necessarily in this case, but he had said that we must be open to being able to hear truth from wherever. And we have to use our intuition, of course, and we have to use our good judgment, but never allow your mind to say, well, that person cannot have something to say to me, because it's not true. Anybody can say something that may be the right thing for you at that time. From the mouth of babes, as it sometimes says, wisdom sometimes flows. And so we need to have that openness, but more than the outer, which is of course important, it's that inner openness of receptivity to be able to receive. This is an attitude that we have. It's an attitude, it's a practice, a sadhana, and it's something that we actually can practice and we can become better at it. But it's a general attitude of mind, of not being closed. I know it all. Nobody has anything to tell me. Now we know that if we take that attitude, that's a pathway to death on the spiritual path to have that sort of attitude, because where can we go from there? If we're completely self-sufficient and nothing more is to be known, nothing more can be added to this, what else is there to say? It's like what Paramahansa Yogananda would say. He says, many people at a very young age become psychological antiques. And this isn't something that we want to do. We want to be fresh. We want to keep it open. So we need to be able to have that attitude of openness. And in a sense, it's a mark also of humility, in a sense of being open, that somebody else can share something and offer to us that's of value. Now, how might we do it? I mean, how it's something that, since it is a practice as well, is I think one mark of this is the ability to accept. The ability to accept other people, the ability to accept life as it is, the ability to not impose our own self, our own attitudes, the imposition of our own consciousness upon that which is around us. In a sense, to give other people the freedom to be who they are. To give other people, and sometimes that's wise, and sometimes giving them the freedom also to be ignorant as well, just to be different, and being able to enjoy whatever it is, in whatever guise that God comes to us. I remember that story of Swami Robbed, who he saw everything in life as Ram. Ram came to him in the guise of the train conductor. Ram came to him in the guise of people on the roadside. Ram came to him as the beggar, and Ram came to him as the thief as well, who asked him for everything he gave. And he was so pleased when that happened, because he saw Ram was asking him for something, and he gladly gave whatever it was to that person. And of course you see this as the mark of saintliness of a person in any religion, whether east or west, north, south. You see, the saints all have this quality of total acceptance of other people, total acceptance of the God shining in that other person. It's not in the differences in the outward circumstances that they're accepting. What they're accepting is underneath it, whatever it might be, what underneath that personality. Sometimes it's maybe difficult personality. There's something there, and being able to see that God in the other person, this is the mark of what the saints are. And you see this in the lives of the great ones. The robbers would come, the thieves, and all of that, and they would accept them. And often in that very acceptance, they would act as a mirror to that person's higher potential, and that person would be changed, be saved. There was that story in the life of Paramahansa Yogananda where a person was sent to, Yogananda had spoken about some of the selfishness that was taking place in the 1930s in America at that time, and certain people not acting properly. And somebody had sent a gunman to shoot him and to teach him a lesson, you might say. And Yogananda saw this man when he came to him with the gun in his hand. He wasn't afraid. He just looked into his eyes and said, "Why do you live this way?" Can you imagine? Somebody, would you be able to do that? Somebody coming and threatening you like that with a weapon? "Why do you live this way? You're not happy." And the man just all of a sudden was touched, and he began to shake. He began to tremble, and he dropped the gun, and he said, "I can't live this way any longer." And Yogananda, just blessed him in that way. He touched him, and he left Yogananda alone and went on his way, ran off. And I hope, we never heard the finish of the story, but I hope his life was changed in that blessing. Because Yogananda didn't see a gunman. He didn't see somebody who was there to hurt him. He saw a fellow who was in pain, who was obviously taking the wrong course in life. Or even if you don't, not to speak of other people, think of how those stories of the saints and Yogananda as an example were able to tame wild tigers. Now you have the tigers in the human world, but you also have the tigers out there in the wild. That's how that tiger came to attack the bullock's cart, the bullocks that were pulling Yogananda's cart at night with the other children when they were out in the forest. And Yogananda just looked at that tiger, and the tiger laid down, and Yogananda was able to, and rolled over, it's even said, rolled over, and Yogananda was able to stroke the tiger, and then the tiger got up and left. Now how is that possible? He didn't, you could say that's an extreme case here. He didn't stereotype, obviously. Speaking of stereotypes, he didn't see that tiger, as a man-eating tiger or as a wild beast. He saw the soul in that tiger as well. He saw it with love, and it's what love what transforms other people. But what is love? Love is that which brings us together. Love is those things that shows us our commonality. And this is the mark, you see, in the great saints. Somebody who is able to transcend that. So in life, if you cannot see that, if we're not developed yet to be able to see that level of commonality as the saints do, at least let's be neutral. Let's not see the differences. Let's give everybody a chance. Don't stereotype others, and more importantly, perhaps, let's not stereotype ourselves. I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm another, I'm no good, I'm great, whatever it might be. We don't think of ourselves as, just take that advice to heart that Swami Shri Yukteswar gave to Yogananda that I started with. He said, when you go to the West, forget you're an Indian. And don't become an American. No, he didn't mean totally to forget his heritage or anything like that, but he was saying don't identify. We're people of the world, and this is how we want to be. And if we are that way, you see, in very mysterious ways, God works mysteriously. If we see other people and are accepting of them, somehow other people relax, just like that. Those people in those stories I've just spoken of, they relax and they reciprocate. And this, so to stereotype others, it's not good for them. And we aren't blessing people when we do that. But the real damage when we do it to ourselves is we end up stereotyping ourselves in the process of limiting other people. You limit them, we limit ourselves. Let's break those barriers down. Embrace all as children of God. Many blessings to you.